Welcome. You are listening to Haunted Histories on Paranormal UK Radio. And hello and welcome to the new episode of Haunted Histories, here only on Paranormal UK Radio. Yes, it's me, it's Penny Griffiths Morgan. I'm back for another shot of history and mystery for you, and tonight's show is going to be quite an interesting one, and I know it's one that I've had quite a few people say, can you look into that, can you have a chat about it? So, you know, your wish is my command, as they say, sort of. I can't always sort of give you what you want, but I'll try my best. As always, my intro music is from the wonderful Mr. Andy Saw, and it's from his 72 Minutes in the Woods series, if you like, of music, which accompanies his wonderful book that he brought out that's available on Amazon, and I think the music is as well. By now, some of you should have received your new copy of Haunted magazine. I hope you enjoy the articles in it. Let me know what you think. I've got quite a few for them to publish over the next year or so you should enjoy it. Ha-ha. And what did everyone think of the different Paracons we had on Paranormal Weekend? There were some really good things on there for you. I hope you enjoyed the presentation I did on the Ghosts of Castle. If you've got any questions on it, do let me know. Well, what else have I been up to? Not a lot, to be quite honest. Obviously, we're still sort of under a lockdown in the UK. We're still being sensible. The kids still aren't back at school. So I am still the teacher, and not once have one of my children bought me an apple to placate me. Although, funnily enough, the other evening, my 6-year-old went wandering off into the kitchen and we heard a clinking noise. He comes back with a glass of wine for me. I was quite impressed with him. Either that or I'm drinking far too much at the moment and he thinks that's all I drink, or I looked really stressed and he thought I needed one. Not sure, but I thought the gesture was touching. Anyway, tonight's show, well, this place is actually not too far from me. It's in, I suppose you could say it's in my neck of the woods. It's in North 6 in London, and it's Highgate Cemetery. And to talk Highgate Cemetery, I've actually got two friends of mine who I'm going to wind them up by calling them Brummies now, because they're not Brummies, they're from the Black Country. It's Russ and John from Wednesbury Paranormal. They're in the Midlands. How you doing, boys?
I'm going to have to hang up now, sorry.
Hang up.
What's he calling us Brummies?
We're Black Country.
I did say I mean Black Country, be fair. I tell you what, my eldest son was doing a history project not so long ago, and one of the questions it was talking about industrialisation, and one of them was, why was the Black Country known as such? And some of the answers that people were giving were quite funny. They were quite funny. I did have to point out to him it was from the industrialisation and the smoke and everything, and he's like, really? Yeah, but some of the answers were quite amusing. I think one was that everyone preferred to wear black. They were all goths, I think, or something. There were some quite funny answers that people were putting. I was almost tempted to come up with one myself for him, but I thought, no, I better help him out and give him the right answer.
It would be lovely to know that the Goths actually originated from the Black Country. That would be fantastic.
What's that, sorry?
I said it would be great if we knew the Goths had actually started in the Black Country. That would be quite something to know, but no.
But you have got some famous people from the Black Country area, though, haven't you?
Oh.
Not just yourselves, obviously.
I wished. Ozzy Osbourne was Black Country, wasn't he?
He was, yep.
Yeah. Noddy Holder.
Went Slade. Slade
yeah.
were, yeah.
Jasper Carey.
Yeah?
Yes.
Oh, he's a Brummie.
Yeah.
Brummie.
No,
Oh,
I'm
you're not allowed to
struggling
count
now.
him then. You can't make him token Black Country just for the purpose of this podcast.
No. Not even for Jasper.
But now, one of the things about the Black Country is you do have quite a few interesting places there to investigate. I know I did a show with Andy about Smethwick Baths just a few shows ago, and that sounds like a fascinating place. And Smethwick itself sounds a bit like a hub of activity. Where else is there in your neck of the woods that people tend to find there's a lot of ghost stories about?
Dudley Castle.
Dudley.
Oh, yeah.
Dudley.
Dudley Castle, yeah.
So I'm going to be taking the mickey this whole show. It's an in-joke in this house. We don't say, if we say we're going to Dudley, we don't say we're going to Dudley, it's like we're going to Dudley. And it's like who can say it the best. It's just one of those in-jokes, sorry.
That's okay.
That's okay, because you're winning so far, because I don't say like that anyway, so that's all.
You don't say Dudley? Dudley?
Dudley. Dudley. I don't know, I'm not sure. I'll say no.
I'd say Dudley if I was pronouncing it in my accent.
Dudley.
Dudley.
Dudley Castle.
Oh, that sounds very posh, John. So you got Dudley Castle. Where else do people tend to go in your neck of the woods?
But you got the Station Hotel, which is right by Dudley Castle, just over there, actually. It used to be on the same grounds. Well, the hotel is quite haunted there as well.
Mm-hmm.
We've got loads. We've got the Manor House. That's in Wednesbury, it's just up the road from me. You've got Oak House. You've got... what else we got, John? We got...
You just missed a big one right by Dudley Castle, which is the Black Country Museum as well.
We can't get in there, though.
No, you can't. Well, they do ghost nights, though.
Yeah.
So you can't go there to do...
But basically, if someone came to visit the Black Country, there's quite a lot for them to do.
Definitely.
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah.
So how did you two get into this weird and wacky world we know of as the paranormal?
You can start with us.
Yeah, I've been into it from a wee lad. So basically, I had a few experiences I couldn't explain, and then my thirst for knowledge and research went from early teens. So, and I'm forever learning, forever listening and absorbing, and I just love it. And I love the people involved in it. I love the research. I love the gadgets. I love everything about it. It's just a big passion, and the deeper down the rabbit hole I go, the more I'm learning. So John's different path to me though. So.
Well, I think I started in my early years, really, because my parents were both spiritualists.
Oh wow!
And used to spend a spiritualist church in Bilston, also in the Black Country. And as the only child at the time, I used to have to go with them on the circle nights and the church nights on the Sunday. So I suppose that is probably where I got my first initial interest in there. My aunt, I used to call her my Auntie Pat. She was a medium. And so it started very young for me, really.
Wow. So I guess, it's like with me, with my parents, it's been a bit of a battle getting them not to think I'm sort of a devil worshipper or something, because I'm interested in this. And ironically, it's actually my dad who's the sort of the mechanical engineer, Brunel educated one, who's actually taken more of an interest in it and quite amazed at some of the stuff I've been able to validate, that I've sort of played him on an EVP, and then we've found a name that actually historically fits perfectly with it. Whereas my mum's still like, no, it's all wrong. I guess with having sort of parents who already had an acceptance of it, they're not going to look at you so much like you should be burnt at the stake, shall we say?
Not quite. That came on later.
Well, that's being a
In my late
teenager.
teens, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's being a teenager. I think all parents want to burn their kids at the stake when they're a teenager, don't they?
My old man's a proper sceptic. I mean, there's a reason for everything, a scientific reason or a natural reason for everything. But my mum's she's a believer. So I follow my own journey, my own path, and make my own decision. I think that that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, my dad's the same. I mean, when I had the weirdest experience I had to me when I was in a church for my old history teacher's funeral, and this key, my car key, and you know how thick a car key is, it managed to twist. It was like twisted about 90 degrees and then bent over double in my bag while I was in the church. And even the locksmith who was trying to cut me a new key, because I only had one key for my car, he couldn't work out how I'd done it without tools, because he was struggling to straighten it with all the tools. And my dad spent about 3 months with loads of old car keys trying to do it without tools. It was in my handbag underneath the pew. There was nothing that could have done it. And even after 3 months, he went, I can't do it. I'm a mechanical engineer with a degree from Brunel, and I can't do this. And it was then he started to think that maybe there's a possibility, because even now, sort of 25 years on, I can't work out how it happened. It is paranormal, because, I mean, you've seen how thick a car key is. There's no way. It was in my handbag, on the top of my handbag, with nothing else on it, under a pew. So unless someone had crawled down there with a brace and pliers and everything and fiddled with it while I was sitting there, I don't know how it happened.
Heat.
Pardon?
No. Extreme heat. That's the only way, really.
Well, to be extreme enough to do that, we would have all been passing out in the church.
Yeah.
And let's face it, big old stone churches don't really get that hot, do they? And it was in the middle of summer as well, so the heating pipes wouldn't have been on. There were no. I checked. I went back there to look and see if there was pipes underneath the pews, and there weren't any. There's nothing. So I don't know. I still don't know to this day how it happened.
I think it took an amazing amount of heat in that pipe to bend the car key, to be honest.
But not just bend it, twist it, and then bend it over.
Twist it. Well,
it was it wasn't just slightly bent, it was twisted and then bent over, because the key cutter, to cut a new one, he had to snap it. He couldn't twist it back. He said, it's going to snap. And the minute he twisted it, it snapped, and he had to try and put the two pieces together to cut a new one. And he sort of said to me, how did you do this? I went, I don't know. And the only thing I can think of is it was my history teacher didn't want me to drive for some reason. That was the only thing I can think of, that he did it. And the fun thing was, about a year later, I actually lost my little sister, but she was the one who came out to drive me into Norwich at breakneck speed to get me to a key cutter before they shut. And it was one of those hilarious, when you're just sitting there killing yourself laughing. You're both killing yourselves laughing because of how funny it is what you're having to do. And I do wonder if it was like to give me a good memory before she passed away. I don't know. But I know my dad, the mechanical engineer with a degree from Brunel, he couldn't fathom it out, and he spent months with loads of old keys trying to work it out. He couldn't do it. So
it's amazing.
It is, isn't it?
Did you keep the key?
No, the locksmith threw it away before I had a chance. But back then I wasn't really sort of that. I didn't really. Well, not that I didn't believe it. You were talking 25 years ago. People didn't talk about it then. Yeah. It was like if you mentioned it back then, you were put into the local mental hospital. Do you know what I mean? And this is Norfolk as well, which is even worse. But it was just one of those things. But yeah, it's interesting. So I think, JT, you had a bit of a head start by having family who were spiritualists.
Yeah. I decided to take a little diversion then, but yes, I'm back into it now. That's fine.
I think we all do. I did. I think it was in my sort of late 20s. I thought, no, I can't be believing in all this. I need a career. I need to buy a house. I need to be sensible. And then once I got into my mid-30s again, and I started hearing things and seeing things, I was like, all right, I'm back.
I studied ufology for nearly 10 years before I went back into the spirit world. So
Really?
So I took a break as well.
Oh.
Yeah, I was watching the stars for years.
I think a lot of people
it's
do.
It's all paranormal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Connected.
It's all paranormal, yeah.
Definitely. Just don't tell me you're a flat earther.
No, I'm not. No,
no.
Not.
Good.
I wouldn't talk to him if he was.
Oh dear. The funniest comment I had from someone recently, we were talking about this, and we both agreed that flat earthers, we don't get it. And she said that she's born deaf, but they still managed to make her ears bleed with the stuff they spout, which I thought... I actually spat my drink out laughing as I read that comment. I thought it was brilliant. Right, so tonight we're talking about Highgate Cemetery.
Yeah.
Now, Highgate isn't that close to you guys. It's, what, about 150 miles away, would you say?
It's a good one, yeah. It's easily, yeah. It's a bit more than that, to be honest.
What first attracted you to Highgate Cemetery as a project?
Hammer horror films.
Oh, okay. That simple.
Yeah, well,
yeah, it probably was, to be honest. For me personally, it was the person we're going to be talking about later.
Right.
I read in the papers at the time in the 70s about the subject, and I just got into it a little bit then, and it's just grown and grown and grown. And it's been going on for many years, and it's really interesting to read about. You know, get so many different variations and different stories.
Yeah.
The sheer beauty of it, really, the architecture,
the Victoriana.
Yeah, beautiful. Why would they have an Egyptian area, or an area called the Circle of Lebanon and things like that? The mystique of it all, I think. So
yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, let's be honest. I mean, for everything that people criticised the Victorians about, there were certain things that they were pretty darn good at, and grandeur and Gothic and everything else was one of those things. Now, for anyone wanting a sort of, I know Russ is going to talk a bit about the history, but as I said, it's in N6 in London. It was built in 1839.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Sure.
And it was part of what was known as the Magnificent Seven.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So in London they were having a problem. There was too many people to be buried and not enough space, which is why actually when you travel around London sometimes you'll see tiny little graveyards next to places that have got like 10 graves in, and you can't work out why, because there's no church, they were just finding any space they could to consecrate and bury people. And it's funny actually, because when you look at other countries, I mean, Paris had a similar problem, which is why they created the catacombs in Paris, the ossuaries. It was a similar problem. Too many people, not enough space. And at the end of the day, there is a health risk if people aren't interred properly. You do get sort of cholera and all those horrible diseases, which London did fall foul, most of Britain fell foul of. Britain's big cities fell foul of quite badly. So it's part of the Magnificent Seven. And the seven, you've got Abney Park, Brompton, Nunhead, Kensal Green, West Norwood, and Tower Hamlets.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, and Highgate was the prestige one of the seven. It was for the landed gentry and the well-to-do.
Yeah.
So it was,
And the first person interred at Highgate was?
The lady's name was Elizabeth Jackson.
Yay!
She was buried there on the 26th of May, 1839.
You've got it. She was from Windmill. She was from Little Windmill Street in Soho.
That's right. So that's right.
Not sure of the cause of death, but
no, I don't. I didn't look up that much. I just thought it was interesting. She was the first person who was buried there.
Age 36.
She was in her 40s, I think. Early 40s, I think she was.
No, 36, mate.
It's all right. She was youngish. Young. Yeah, young.
For Victorian standards, though.
Not if she was middle class.
No, okay.
No, if she was middle class, that's still classed as quite young. I mean, well, yes, even for working class, I think it was about mid-50s was average for a working class or poor person, so to speak. But middle classes, no, it was a bit older because they had access to doctors and they could pay for that kind of medical help and everything else. So no, I mean, it probably a bit more than middle-aged it would have been classed as then.
Yeah.
But I don't know her cause of death. I didn't look up that much. But I just thought, Elizabeth Jackson, she was the first person to be buried there, or interred there. So tell me more about the history of the place, Russ.
Yeah, well, okay, obviously you've hit on a lot there in relation to the population boom in London back then, and also, obviously, the lowish mortality rate. Obviously, there was an inadequate burial space. So you said there was pouring bodies in between taverns and shops, and there was even using quicklime to scatter onto the shallow earth, really, to try and decompose the bodies quicker, to reuse the graves. Yeah. So there's an absolute serious problem there. And obviously it couldn't go on like that, so they had to go to Parliament to hopefully pass a bill to create this magnificent 7, these cemeteries. But there was an issue in relation to they didn't want to go into rural areas of London, so there's always this dispute, and obviously again the landed gentry, a bit of snobbery, but they didn't want to do that. So obviously a lot of pressure, and in relation to the health issues, they had to do it. And back then they decided to make these seven cemeteries, obviously including Highgate. It opened in 1839, 20th of May, and it was dedicated to St James.
Yep.
And that by the Lord Bishop of London. 17 acres was the west side of the cemetery, which opened first. There's two sides of Swains Lane. There's the west and the east. The west was opened first, and then 20 years later they opened the east side, based on the fact that obviously it was boom time there. They was making a lot of profit, and there was obviously the demand as well. Plus, it was it was the fashion back then for the gentry to have flamboyant funerals and memorials there. So that's why they opened the east side to extend on that. But the site itself covers 17 acres. 15 acres consecrated by Church of England, and the 2 acres left for dissenters. So other ones, but
non-C of E, in other words, yeah.
Sorry, it's an old word. Yeah, but the whole cemetery is not just a cemetery. We're closely on the Gothic element of the Victorian era, but it's also a nature reserve. There, you can actually go there, and bird spotters and wildlife hobbyists go there a lot to go and study that. It's just an absolute mysterious, mystique place. It's just one of its. So there's about 100.
It's now.
Sorry.
So it's now a registered park and garden, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. But there's about 170,000 bodies that are buried there, but there's only 53,000 graves. Yeah. So, Penny, you might be able to tell us a bit more about it. Is that because there was a lot of mass burials back then, or
more likely they're shared graves?
Yeah.
It wasn't. It's not uncommon to find graves that have been used more than once. That when a body has got it, they almost bury on top of each other. Plus, if you've also got some of the crypts that are there, they'll have more than one body in each crypt. So it's not even your bog standard parish sort of church will have multiple occupancy graves, and you may not know about it unless you go through the parish records. So it's not as uncommon as people think. Plus, if you've got, say, husband and wife, I mean, I know a lot of Charles Dickens' family are buried there. And his mum and dad, I think they're in a shared grave. So there would be 2 in one grave. So, it wasn't as uncommon as... I must admit, I don't think I'd want to be in the same grave as my husband. He's a bugger for sort of nicking the bed as it is. I don't really want to be sharing same grave with him for the rest of my life. I'd like my own this time. But, you know me, I can't keep serious for too long, but no, that would be the reason why they... And it was also a cost thing. I mean, I didn't find anything about many... There must have been some pauper graves at Highgate that are undocumented because of its proximity to St Pancras Workhouse, but I couldn't find confirmation of any of them on the records that I could access online. They'd be in the actual parish records that are probably at the records office in London, but pauper graves, they tended to share graves to keep the costs down as well. In fact, I know with the workhouses they had to stop at one point. They were waiting until they had sort of 6 or 7 bodies and then commissioning the undertaker to take them and bury them all in one place if nobody had claimed them. Which I know they had to stop doing. So that could be another reason, but I don't know. That's a speculation. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I think it's probably like that in a lot of cemeteries, isn't it? I think, as you said, there's going to be a lot of burials there that you don't know about, or they're kept not quiet, but you know what I mean. They're just disposed of that way.
Well, if you don't have the money to pay for a big stone, how will anyone know that's there? If all you could afford at the time was a wooden cross, and the wooden cross will if it was done in 1840, 1841, that wooden cross would have probably fallen apart by about 1880. And if there's no record, they could have possibly borrowed. I don't know. I'm speculating, but I do know there were certain people who were buried together, like say some of Charles Dickens' family were all buried in the same plot, and you've got multiple occupancy crypts and that kind of thing. So that doesn't surprise me. It's not uncommon, shall we say?
Definitely not. But the actual designer of the cemetery itself has got an interesting story. His name was a gentleman called Stephen Geary. I don't know if you've heard of him or not, but he was he helped design and bring some of the influences he did in relation to some of the Egyptian architecture there and the terrace catacombs in there as well. It was all his idea. Now Stephen Geary himself, he was an entrepreneur back in Victorian London. He was also an inventor. He actually had patents on some of his own inventions.
All right.
So he obviously very academic. He had a lot of awards in his academia years. And he also actually, I don't know if they're still there in London, but he also designed a lot of gin palaces, which were quite popular in London back then, in Victoria, Britain. So, which I found very interesting. But,
yes, gin was. Gin was. I can't say it was the wine bar of its generation, but it wasn't, because the people who drank gin weren't sort of what we'd have called yuppies and everything else. It was, there's stories of some of the poor women that Jack the Ripper killed, trying to get a couple of pennies together to go and buy some gin at the gin palaces. They was kind of your working class sort of, because it was cheap, relief. I mean, it always makes me think of Miss Hannigan in Annie, because she was brewing gin in her bath, wasn't she? I'm talking about the original one, not the remake. I'm talking about the original sort of non-PC one, I suppose you could call it, with Carol Burnett playing Miss Hannigan and Tim Curry as Rooster. And she was brewing gin because that's what people drank, because it was cheap. And it got you drunk quick. And all right, she was Depression era, not Victorian era, but it was the same principle. Got them drunk quick. It got them out of the rubbish life that they were living, because they were drunk as a skunk and didn't really know what they were doing. So yeah, I'm sure that some of those palaces still exist, and they've been morphed into pubs and offices. And that'd be an interesting one to do a tour of, wouldn't it? A London tour of former gin palaces.
Look for that one, Penny. Definitely will come down to
2031 or something. I'll get that one.
Stephen, or Mr. Geary, actually died in 1854, and he's actually buried in the west side of Highgate. So his tomb his memorial is on the main path between its corner and the Egyptian Avenue, which he had such a big influence in. So we not saw that when we went down there, but I'd like to keep an eye out for that next time, just to say fair play to you for doing it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things there are quite a lot of famous people buried in the two sites, and we'll get onto the second site in a second. But there are quite a lot of famous people. I mean, Karl Marx is probably one of the most famous ones. One of the ones that I like the most is George Eliot, or Mary Ann Evans, as her real name was. The fact that Roger Lloyd Pack is buried there. Trigger, was it Trigger he played in Only Fools and Horses? It was, wasn't it? Trigger. George Michael is buried there. So there's some amazing famous people buried there, and I mean it's a nice part of London. It is quite a sort of market part of London, and you don't realise it. I must admit, until I started looking into it, I didn't realise it was still an active burial ground. I thought it had been sort of shut off because of the fact that the company that was set up to run it was the London Cemetery Company. They actually went bankrupt eventually in 1960, and it did start to sort of fall into a bit of disrepair and everything. But before we go any further, one of the things I will say, and I'm going to caveat myself here, and yes, you are listening to Haunted Histories on Paranormal UK Radio, and I'm not a big killjoy or anything, I promise. But this place, it's still an active burial ground. So, if it's somewhere you want to visit, don't be a disrespectful jerk and break in out of hours to see what you can find. Go on one of the tours. Have some morals, have some manners. And also, what we're going to talk about later, guides there don't really like talking about. And if you bring up some of the paranormal stuff we're going to talk about later, you might find yourself kicked out on your backside with no refund. So be respectful, be courteous. Don't try and break into the place out of hours to see if you can find anything. And just keep cognizant of the fact that there are people whose loved ones are buried there, and they're still in their living memory are buried there. And, if they hear that one of the graves has been desecrated because people are trying to hunt for something paranormal, think how you'd feel if that was your loved one in your graveyard that happened to. So I do just want to say that, because some of the stuff that happened there, what we're going to talk about in the 60s and 70s, in my mind, was very wrong. I think it was wrong what they were doing there. I think it was very disrespectful, and I'm not a religious person, but I still don't think digging up graves and everything is a good idea. Okay, so sensible Penny gone.
Can I just add to that? Sorry, Penny. Can I just add to that? If people do want to go, they do hold events there, but if they go on the internet, they can see the Friends of Highgate website, which will list all the events coming up, and they can look onto there for some information on that as well.
Yeah. No, good point. Thank you, John. The main point I want to make to people is, don't go being a jerk. Don't go urbexing and everything else, because if and when you get arrested or beaten to a pulp by someone who doesn't like the fact you're there, I'm not going to come and defend you because I've told you not to do it, and to be respectful. It's like, I think it's the same with a lot of these places. I've been reading up quite a few that have been broken into over the lockdown. Yeah. I know Drakelo's been broken into, hasn't it? The farmhouse, the castle. I can't for life remember, but there's been quite a few been broken into. Don't do it. Don't be an arsehole. Be respectful of these places, because if you destroy them, none of us will be allowed in, and you'll spoil it for all of us, and you're not going to achieve anything. So that's sensible Penny. So that is sensible Penny saying that to you, but I'm sure my good friends from the Black Country agree with me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Respect is the big word, isn't it?
Yes.
Respect is the main word for us.
Yes. Don't be an arsehole. Yeah.
The Karl Marx grave there, it was actually bombed twice, firebombed twice in the 60s, which, let the guy have some rest, even if you disagree with him.
Wasn't it Nazis? It was Nazi sympathisers who did it, according to the newspaper reports I found. It's like, why? What is that going to achieve? People are just going to think you're jerks. Well, if they don't already, they really will now. I don't get stuff like, I don't get that kind of thing. Leave flowers or leave a stone on a Jewish grave or whatever it is you want to do, but trying to blow something up, why? Why? I say that a lot. I do say that a lot at sort of reading something. They're like, why? Why did you do that? So it started to get. And one of the things we haven't mentioned is what the grounds of Highgate had been before they became Highgate Cemetery, and it was actually the grounds of the estate, of the Ashurst estate. That had, I was trying to find some pictures of the old manor house that would have been there, but it was pretty derelict by sort of 1836 to 39 when it eventually got pulled down. But what was interesting is in the place of the manor house there is St Michael's Parish Church, which overlooks the cemetery, and the foundations there are remnants of the actual foundations, and believe it or not, the wine cellar of Ashurst House in the crypt of the church. And it's in this church that the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge is buried. Xanadu de Kubla Khan, a stately pleasure-dome decree where Alf the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man. That one. He's buried there, which I thought was quite interesting. Now, just remember about St Michael's Parish Church, because I might mention it again later, but that sort of overlooks the cemetery and is built on the same ground, the Ashurst estate.
The whole 17 acres was bought to the cost of £3,500, I think it was, in those days. So,
can you imagine buying parts of 17 acres of London for that now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very good buy that.
So they decided, as you mentioned earlier, in 1856 to build an extension on the other side of Swains Lane, and they built the east side cemetery. Now, do you know what they did? What people were worried about was if they'd been in sort of gone through their ceremony, for want of a better term, in the chapel, then they had to be taken out of the original cemetery into the new one. They were worried they were leaving consecrated ground.
Okay.
They had that covered, didn't they?
They did. How did they have that covered?
They built a tunnel.
They did build a tunnel, yes.
Which went under what is now the old Swains Lane. And it went from the one to the other.
Is it still there, do you know? Because I couldn't find out.
I actually don't know the answer to that. Would be really interesting to find out, actually, wouldn't it? If it's still
I had to ask on the next
and
one.
it's still used. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. There you go. That's a piece of homework for you, because I couldn't find out the answer.
So our next visit, that'll be our first question we'll find out, yeah.
And then you can let me know, and I can put a thing on my page to say, actually, the answer to this question is... I would have said it would have to be, because otherwise it's still leaving, unless they've consecrated the whole of Swains Lane. But yeah, they built a tunnel so that you never actually had to leave the consecrated ground to go into the next bit, which I thought was quite interesting. Another thing they built, there's Fireman's Corner that was put in 1934.
Yeah, 90 firemen are buried there, aren't they? Or interned there.
Yeah, London firemen who've died in service, which I think is pretty amazing. Anything else on the history that you want to mention?
Well, apart from how it declined, and obviously the Friends of Highgate were responsible for the rebirth and regeneration of it, and how it actually went into decline. It basically, obviously, as the Victorian era went on, the need and necessity for such flamboyant burials was coming out of fashion, and also the Great War coming in. So all the gardeners and workers were conscripted up to the war. So this all emanated into a rapid decline of both areas, and as you said, and you hit on earlier, it eventually led to the shutting of its gates in 1960, because they couldn't make any profit. They couldn't pay the staff to keep the upbringing of it. But it did fall into a huge state of disrepair. As you said, lots of vandalism, shrubbery, and the pure upkeep of it needed looking after. So God bless the Friends of Highgate Society on board to... pick up on that was it 1975? I think it was that they started to get involved. Yeah, and and they say they took over with the aim to promote and conserve such an important part of London heritage. So. And I think it's a listed property now, or
I believe so. I believe part of it, at least, is listed. I mean, you're mentioning about the World War I thing, the fact that a lot of the workers there ended up being conscripted and had to go away and fight. Then you had World War II, in effect, a short while later, and Highgate, I know, was bombed repeatedly, but you've got any of the young men who would now have been working there, they've been called up. It does have quite, I can't remember the number, but I did read it somewhere, it does have quite a lot of Civil War graves there as well, from it will be men, I think, who died in both the wars. So, that kind of respect and everything is a shame when you hear that it did start to get sort of left to rack and ruin in the 60s and early 70s. But then that brings us on to its next kind of claim to fame, I suppose we could say. Now, I'm going to say something here. I'm not taking the mickey out of any of these people. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to any of these people that we're going to mention. Because I don't know them. I've never met them. I am sure they're lovely men. John, over to you.
They are fascinating in their own way. The alleged person we're talking about, are you talking about the Highgate Vampire by any chance, Ben?
I may be. Yes, that's not the man.
Yes.
So the men I'm talking about. But I'm I'm talking about the legend of the Highgate Vampire, which is probably one of the ones that most people associate with Highgate.
Well, I suppose we'll start by talking about the legend itself. The legend is there's a 15th century aristocrat who was brought over to England from Romania. He used to practice in black magic, and he was buried on the land, which was later occupied. So this is before the Highgate Cemetery itself. He was buried onto the land, and then he was brought back by occultist followers of himself during a black mass. And then after this, the Highgate Cemetery was built, as we've already said, in 1839. And since then, there's been many reports of seeing this figure around the area, particularly around the Old Swains Lane area, as it goes. So it started 1963-ish, around 1963, where a couple walking down the Old Swains Lane reported being frozen to the spot, unable to move after spotting this very dark figure, very tall, dark figure, described as wearing a black cloak, top hat. And the piece that gets me the most is he had red, glowing eyes, and as they described him, and they literally stood there, froze to the spot, felt all their energy being drained from the bodies until he actually disappeared from in front of the faces. And then we've had several sightings after that. So that's when it actually started, 1963, sorry. It goes on. 1967, I'll just bring them off the top of my head. 2 girls witnessed the bodies leaving the graves in the Northgate Cemetery.
Yep.
They went to the police, scared out of the brains. They literally told the police that they'd witnessed bodies leaving the graves itself. A few weeks after that, another couple walking down Old Swains Lane witnessed a figure floating behind the gate, the North Gate at the cemetery. Just floating there again, top hat, black cloak. They said approximately 6 foot to 7 foot tall, red glowing eyes, ashen faced, very thin. And again, since then, it's been going on for quite a while.
Well, yeah, wasn't there a teenager who lived close by who said she woke up and felt a hand, something holding her hand, and then she had marks on it the next day. Going on the timeline, John, sorry, if they brought over someone from Romania in the 15th century, did you say? That would have been that would have been before the Ashurst estate was built, because the Ashurst estate was built in the 1600s. If they then resurrected this vampire through a black mass, that would have been during the Ashurst estate, because that was there from the early 1600s to the 1800s. So there must have been some kind of proponents of black magic, if the story follows. Yes, in that family. There was also,
before the cemetery was actually there was many ghost reports at the Ashurst house itself as well, prior to the cemetery even being there. So. But no mention of the actual vampire itself, just normal hauntings.
Which wouldn't be surprising when you've got sort of 250 years worth of a family having lived in a place who've probably done some naughty things, as most nobility families did in those days. Okay, so fast forward to, say, around 1970, and the newspapers start talking about animals have been found near the cemetery, drained of their blood.
Well, I suppose you can go back to 1969, to be honest, when David Farrant became mostly interested in the vampire. He was the president of the Psychic and British Occult Society. He decided to go and have a look at the cemetery himself and investigate on his own.
Because he was a London boy, wasn't he, the late David Farrant?
He was a London boy, luckily enough, on the first night of being there on the investigation, he apparently witnessed seen the vampire. Again, described as before, very tall, up to 7 foot tall figure, ashen face, red eyes, cloak, the whole works. He then, after Farrant witnessed this, there were many sightings between 69 and 70, where, as well as Farrant himself, Sean Manchester got involved in it as well and got interested. It made the newspapers, the Ham and High. They sent a reporter down as well, and they found carcasses all over the area, with animal carcasses, should I say, with the throat ripped open and apparently drained of blood, completely drained of blood. And that's when Mr. Farrant and Mr. Manchester both got separately involved in the vampire case and started
very separately.
Very
separately. Yeah.
Let's just say that. let's just say that one. And yeah, so 1970, there was a report on TV made by Sean Manchester himself, basically advertising the fact there was going to be a live vampire hunt at the cemetery on Thames TV, I think it was at the time. So on the night of the 13th, Friday the 13th, of course, March 1970, hundreds and hundreds of vampire hunters, shall we call them, all raided the cemetery and got all involved in this hunt, causing chaos everywhere. I'm not sure how the report goes, but I've read that Mr. Manchester went to a pub to get away from the melee, but I'm not sure that that's correct or not. That's just alleged. Of course, there's absolute chaos. There's gravestones destroyed, graves desecrated, all sorts of things going on. These people went down there in the masses, armed with stakes, crucifixes, you name it, they had it. So, yeah, that would have been a great night to see in a way. I'd love to have been there for that.
The clip's on YouTube, isn't it, John? I think you can actually see the Thames article.
Yeah, you can see some things on there, not all of it. You can see some things on. It would have been like a modern day football match. If you wish to go in there to see a football match all around the cemetery, been mad. Would have been something to see, I would imagine.
I'd have been rolling my eyes so far into the back of my head watching them that I would have probably seen my backside, actually. But anyway.
So we'd be kicking them out, I think.
Yeah, I probably would have been calling them all arseholes for desecrating graves and stuff. But mass hysteria is a very, very strange thing.
Absolutely.
That much I do know. Sorry, carry on, John.
Well, that was really what happened on that night.
Okay.
I mean, they found graves opened and they found stakes plunged into bodies and all sorts of things. Really, really, not what you want to think about, to be honest. Same year, they found a body that had been dismembered.
Yeah.
They found a headless body which had been burnt.
Well, you see, that's interesting. I read that. Can't find any newspaper accounts of it.
No, that's what we've read as well, yes. Yeah.
I went through all the newspaper reports from 1970. Couldn't find one that mentions a woman, charred remains of a headless woman, which I thought...
And that was near the catacombs. That was in the Circle of Lebanon, I think, as well, which is the place where we like the best. But yeah, it's amazing. Very...
So the competition between Sean and David carried on. I also read that there was another vampire hunter who came down, actually from Chelmsford, called Alan Blood. Oh, that's quite a good name. And I just noticed he was from Essex. He was from Chelmsford, Essex.
Is that still the name, I wonder?
Well, it would be a bit good if he was a vampire hunter and his surname was Blood, wouldn't it? I mean, that would be quite interesting. So the competition between Sean and David carries on, but David kind of fares a little bit worse.
Yes, yeah. I mean, Mr. Manchester was definitely on top, I'd say.
Yeah.
He was the best evidence, supposedly, and this sort of thing. And I mean, Manchester even claimed to have destroyed the vampire in early August, I think it was. So he claimed he found the resting place of the vampire thanks to the help of a medium who told him where to go. And he didn't put a stake through the heart of the vampire because that would have been not very nice to do. So what he did, he took 7 crucifixes, 4 candles, and some I think it was about 7 cups of holy water. He did a ritual which banished the entity back to wherever he came from, supposedly. But then 3 years later, he makes another claim. He killed it again. He destroyed it again. So.
And when was it he's supposed to have chased it to Crouch End?
That was in 73, I think it was.
Right.
73. And he found it. He said he discovered it in a cellar of a house. The same. It was a black coffin in the original one. He's found the same black coffin in a cellar of this abandoned mansion, which is on the borders of Highgate and Crouch End.
Which I believe now has been pulled down and is a block of flats, if I remember rightly.
Yeah. I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm not sure.
No, the mansion's not there anymore. I'm pretty sure it's a block of residential flats now in Crouch End.
Okay.
I mean, the difference between... And David ended up getting... Was it 1974 he was arrested? For supposedly desecrating the tombs. Something he denies and always did deny, I believe, quite vehemently. I mean, obviously, poor David passed away last year. But one of the main differences between, I think, apart from the fact personality-wise, I think these two guys were very, very different, is Sean Manchester is Bishop Manchester of the old Catholic Church, whereas David Farrant was a high occult priest and Wicca and that kind of thing. So I would have guessed there would have been a clash there as well, from their belief systems. I'm saying this with as much respect as possible. There would have been a clash there from their belief systems, I would have thought.
Well, I think that Manchester, at the time, I might be wrong with this one, I think he was the president of the British Occult Society.
Right.
Whereas David Farrant was president of the British Psychic and Occult Society. This is what I've found from reading different articles and stuff like that. So yeah, there was definitely something there, wasn't there?
Definitely a clash.
They were never going to be best friends. Yeah,
No, never. Now, I mean, another interesting thing about Bishop Manchester is I read somewhere that he believes he's a descendant of Lord Byron, who was a famous exponent of black magic and general naughtiness, which I know Barry John, who all know who Barry John is, but he's also a guide at Newstead Abbey. He would be able to tell you all about, because that's one of the things people always ask about, the fact that Byron used to drink out the skulls as cups and things like that. So I know that that's a link to black magic, if you want to look at it like that. But in all honesty, do you think there's a vampire there? Because if there is, either Bishop Manchester did manage to get rid of him, or do you think it's a form of mass hysteria?
I don't believe in vampires. Let's get with that first one. I do not believe in vampires. I do not believe in Christopher Lee visiting in your bedroom and biting on your neck. No, I don't. I think it is mass hysteria. We still have these sightings up to today. They haven't stopped. We still get reports coming in. 69, 70 was just the start of it. So up to modern day, there's still sightings coming through. So if Sean Manchester did destroy it, he didn't do a very good job again. So that's 2 times he's had to go with it, and he's still coming in. So, no. Mass hysteria, most definitely. Okay. I think the interesting part of it for me personally is it's the same as David Farrant. He had the belief that ley lines had something to do with it. Mm-hmm. Now, there is a ley line which is in the the North Cemetery, which is in the Circle of Lebanon. That's where it begins. And it carries on and it goes outside the cemetery through Highgate, and it ends up as an old Roman settlement, which is no longer there, but to the area where an old Roman settlement was. It passes through 2 pubs, a very big tall block of flats. It goes through housing estate, and all these places, all along the ley line, without any exception, have all reported this same sighting through different times. So they've all reported a tall figure up to 7 feet tall, a black cloak, a top hat, red glaring eyes. It's all the way down. If you look into the history of it, it's quite fascinating, really. And they all happen along this ley line. So who knows? No, I don't believe in vampires now.
Because I find it interesting that a lot of the reports were from adolescent girls. And with all respect in the world, I was an adolescent girl once. We can hype each other up to see things that maybe aren't there.
Right.
Or, pareidolia, in effect. And hormones are a vicious thing and what they do to your brain. Also, it's, everyone talks about, poltergeists. Adolescent kids, adolescent girls are normally the best ones to get those to. You get the energy for a poltergeist to do its business sort of thing. So maybe that's got something to do with it. But what I found was I found a couple of things which I thought were very, very interesting when I was researching this. That I mentioned St Michael's Parish Church at the beginning being built on the foundations of what was Ashurst House, and in fact part of Ashurst House still exists in the basement. Now this tall dark figure, or a tall dark figure, has been seen walking into the church, walking through the church door, like straight through it. It's been seen walking from the cemetery into the church. Now we've paranormal enthusiasts, we've all talked about this. It's like why can ghosts walk through walls, for want of a better term? And it's like, well, if you look at the plan of where that spirit was there, if it say it isn't a sentient being, if it is a replay, as I call it, of a past event, they're just following the would have. And when you look at the maps, you can see there was no door there at the time, or no wall. It was just an open corridor, and they're just walking along the corridor. Could it be something like that? Could it be a replay from the past when the person is literally just walking up the steps through their front door, for example? But it has been seen walking into the church. Now, I would wager, if it was a vampire, wouldn't be able to walk into a church.
No. Not at all. You would have thought so, no.
Exactly.
No.
So there's that. But then what I found even more interesting, and I don't know if people listening would agree with me, when I started going through newspaper accounts for the first from like when it opened in 1839 to the first half of the 1900s, I found 3 accounts of suicides that all took place in the cemetery. The first one, and the other interesting thing about them all is they were all from gunshot suicides. They were all men. And the first one took place on the 4th of December 1856, and it was a tall gentleman who had dark clothing on. He had a gold ring with a white stone on it, as the newspaper report says, and they believe his name was Henri Feubolet, because they found a couple of letters addressed to people in his pockets, and that's who had signed them. And they also found, I think it was a handkerchief with HF in the corner. At the time, the newspaper reports, and I followed it for a few weeks after the event, they couldn't find any relatives or why he was in London. But the one with that one was that the chap who found him was like a groundsman, and he heard a gunshot go off early in the morning when he started work and thought it was just one of the local men who liked to practice shooting and ignored it. And it wasn't until sort of later in the day when he was knocking off work he found Henri's body and the fact he'd been killed by a gunshot. So we're assuming it was a suicide. We don't know for sure, but we're assuming he is. Then 4 years later, there was a chap who he remained unidentified in the newspapers, and again I followed it up, couldn't find anything, and the undertakers were just leaving the cemetery and they heard the gunshot and they found this body of a man had shot himself. He was actually taken to what they call the dead house, which had been like the mortuary, as we would call it now, at St Pancras Workhouse nearby, while they tried to work out who he was. From what I found in the newspaper reports. They never did. And then sort of 40 years later, there was another person shot themselves in the cemetery, and this was a German by the name of Christian Ramelli, who was a member of the latter House of Israel. And according to the report, he had actually part of his religion was he had to grow his whiskers and the sides of his hair, and he'd got so hot he'd cut it off, and he felt that he'd now betrayed his religion, he wouldn't be able to follow the religion anymore, and became very, very depressed and shot himself. What I find amazing is these are three men all shot themselves in a cemetery. And back then, killing yourself, and I know it sounds a crazy thing and people look at me like I'm nuts, but taking your own life was illegal. If you attempted, believe it or not, if you attempted to take your own life and didn't succeed, and it couldn't be proven that you weren't of sound mind when you did it, you were hanged. I mean, the hypocrisy of that I find quite. Yeah, that's why they always tried to say that people weren't of sound mind when they did it, because then they would be hospitalised rather than hanged. But if they felt you were of sound mind when you tried to take your own life, which, you'd say you're not of sound mind if you try and take your own life. But anyway, it was against the law. Self-murder, it was called. So therefore you were done for murder because you tried to murder yourself. So firstly, you've got three men who all died from a similar method, a gunshot, all killed themselves in effect on consecrated ground.
Yeah.
And I mean, what I was talking to my husband about it, and he was saying, I don't see what you're getting at. I said, well, they wouldn't have been allowed to be buried there, because you're not allowed to be buried in consecrated ground if you killed yourself.
That's right.
So did they do it because they thought, well, then at least my blood is going to be in consecrated ground, because they can't take my blood away, therefore? But if you're going to kill yourself, are you going to be thinking that's clearly anyway, or did something influence them?
That's another interesting question, isn't it? That's a really interesting question. I mean, being a paranormal investigator, I would like to think that it is a spirit there that's been spotted all these times. It's not just teenagers. I mean, we have had some middle-aged ladies spotted there. We've had recently there's been a taxi driver driving down the Old Swains Lane who sighted it walking across Old Swains Lane, and it reportedly walked straight through the 12-foot high wall of the cemetery. Yeah, she's been seen a few times doing the same thing. So
in Trent as well, John. You know the Martin Trent case. It was it's actually spirit. Martin Trent got physically, so it's got to be spirit. So it's intelligent. It's not residual. He actually got virtually attacked, didn't it? It pushed him.
Yeah. That's right.
But that would make me think it's not a vampire. It is. It's spiritual. It's not.
That's right. It's just got to be spiritual, hasn't it? I mean, it's this vampire thought that keeps bugging me. People. How can people think there's such a thing as a vampire? I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, I can kind of see how the legend of vampirism has began, but then even if you go back to Vlad the Impaler, when you read about what was done to his family, you can kind of understand why he went a bit stark raving bonkers and started killing people at a rate of knots. And there is an illness where people crave blood because they crave, I think it's the iron in blood, and I think those are what gets confused for vampirism. But I would also say, if there was a vampire there, why did it take until the early 60s before it appeared? If it had been summoned 100 years previously, it would have had to have fed on something. Are there any reports of people being exsanguinated near to Highgate? No.
Personally, if you want my personal opinion, I think it's all come down to a gentleman called Bram Stoker, who, of course, is the author of the original book Dracula. I mean, Bram Stoker even mentions Highgate Cemetery in his first novel. He's saying it's the burial place of the first woman Dracula killed after coming over to the country.
But when was that published? That was 18 something.
Yeah, in the 1800s. So, but linking from there, I think it was 69. I think it was in 1970 when the film. What was it, Curse of the Blood of Dracula or something like that? Was actually filmed. It was filmed at Highgate Cemetery, partly filmed there. And so you had Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, all the stars there, which made a massive interest in the cemetery at the time while it was being filmed. So I think there's links to do with that, where the Highgate Vampire actually, the story came from.
John,
maybe.
What was the lady's name with the ageless corpse? Where
Elizabeth Siddal.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Siddal was a famous poet and author who died and was buried in Highgate Cemetery. I forgot the date offhand, I can't remember it off my head. She was buried in Highgate Cemetery. Some 6 or 7 years later, the family wished the body to be brought back up again, the grave to be opened again, because when she was buried with some of her poetry, and they wanted to recover the poetry. So 6 years, I think it was, after she was buried, they dug the grave up, and when they opened the coffin, they were astonished to see she looked no different from when she was buried 6 years earlier, or 7 years earlier, from being buried 6 feet underground. I mean, her hair looked as freshly washed and dried as when she was buried. There was no, supposedly, I'll say supposedly, no decay on the body. And this made the papers then, got the interest then, and this is where Bram Stoker, we think, may have got the original thoughts for the novel from.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was basically classed as one of the undead, a vampire, at the time.
I would guarantee, though, if they dug up all the graves, they'd find more than one person still in that state, because I can't remember what it's called, but there is a medical... So, yeah. There is a... Pardon?
I would imagine there would be, yeah.
Yeah, there's a medical term for it, and for the life of me, I didn't look this up because I didn't know we were going to go along this route, but there is a medical term for it, and yeah, you're right. I think that's where a lot of the whole sort of undead thing has come from, but I can't... It's something to do with the exact chemicals in the coffin, the lining, what chemicals were in the person's body at the time, the ground, and it all makes that perfect storm where the person takes hundreds of years to decay as opposed to just a few years. And I can't... I'm going to have to look it up because it's going to bug me now, but I have read cases of that before in, like, sort of mystery articles and stuff. And
it's not all Victorian gin.
No, it's annoying me now. I'm going to be looking it up. I'm going to have to look it up afterwards and put a sort of an addition onto this podcast when it comes out as a note. But it's a medical thing, and I have to say, for the life of me, I can't remember what it's called. But I have read about it before, and it's freaked people out before.
Wow. There's no history of necromancy there at all. I couldn't find any records in relation to necromancy practices. So, yeah.
I just find it interesting, like you say, the links between what started being done there with the whole Hammer House of Horror thing and the fact the 60s. And you've got to bear in mind the 60s, people were taking drugs that could have caused them to hallucinate. I'm not saying they were all drug addicts, but they were taking LSD and all that kind of thing. And then you had the 70s come in that was trying to follow on from the roaring 60s. But what else did we have in the 70s? I mean, we mentioned Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, all that kind of thing. All were talking about, black magic and those kind of... So there was a kind of... should we say, a leaning towards that kind of thing in the late 60s, early 70s?
I think something was conjured. Definitely something was conjured. And it could have been from a lower vibration or, some kind of demon that can shapeshift, and portray this character. It could be something, as you say, spiritual along that way.
But again, how would a demon walk into the church?
Yeah,
and how would a demon walk along consecrated ground?
That could have been residual. That could have been a separate entity. But I do think with all the history of the cult, dark magic practices there, something could have been conjured. Yeah.
But is this documented history? All right, I'm going to argue with you both now. Is this documented history? Okay. I'm not being a snob, and I'm not thinking I know it all. However, this supposed... Now, I can understand animals found drained of blood would indicate to me someone's been doing something slightly satanic. That's what it would argue to me. It doesn't argue to me that vampires drain them of blood, because if you believe all the vampire lore, they don't like animal blood. It doesn't taste right. It doesn't have the right level of iron or whatever it is supposedly in it. But there is a sort of, people like to think that black magic do nasty things to animals and children. Although if you talk to anyone who is a Satanist, they actually find that quite a horrific suggestion. But whatever. So if people were dabbling and thinking that they were doing black magic to summon something, they possibly would have done these animal rituals and then just dumped the animals, the carcasses, wherever. That, to me, makes sense. However, is there any documented evidence of black magic having been done on that site before all this started in the 60s and 70s?
I couldn't find any. No.
We can't find any, no.
And I couldn't find any associated, the research I did, with the family of Ashurst House either. Now, it's quite easy to find it when you look at people like Lord Byron and all of that, but I couldn't find anything to do with them. So I'm wondering if it's almost a case of Chinese whispers. People have said, oh, black magic's been done here. We are doing black magic. It's that kind of, without questioning, has it been done? Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? It's a bit like when people say, oh, that place is haunted. There's no documented proof of it. But someone said it is, so therefore it's like when someone says, oh yeah, this place was used as a mortuary and an orphanage. Nobody bothers to check. They just assume. And they say, yeah, we've heard all these children running around. Really? Okay.
Well, is it something you'd want to put out there, I presume, in the press? Would the Herald Express back then, the local rag for the area, would they really want to be able to publish something like that? Again, creating mass hysteria, you don't know.
But the thing is, I mean, the fact that they were, all right, Byron was a bit later than when Ashurst House was, but it was documented. He would have, people did say, I mean, all right, we'll take another one, the Hellfire Caves in High Wycombe. There's accounts of that having had slightly nefarious things being done in it. It would surprise me if it was being done that it hadn't been written down somewhere, especially if it was being done during like the 1700s, during the Georgian period. It would have been somewhere. Someone would have said something. I don't know. I'm just speculating here, but I won't say something's definite until I've read it. Read it as source.
That's right.
And
to me.
Go on, sorry, John.
Sorry, go on. To me, you said the 60s and 70s, it was a massive revival of like mysticism and the occult, paganism, Eastern mysticism, Satanism, witchcraft, you name it. It was all there. You had Aleister Crowley suddenly came back into the fore.
Yeah.
So to me, I think it's possible because Highgate is such an atmospheric cemetery, and it's got the atmosphere is absolutely perfect for stuff like this. So I think there could have been quite massy going on there. Yes, I didn't think there was. But again, like you said, there's nothing written down reporting this. But to me personally, I think it would have gone.
Oh, I'm agreeing with you. I think in the 1960s and 1970s, and did someone just fall off their chair then? That's what it sounded like.
I might just fell over.
Okay. Apologies if someone had headphones on when they heard that. I was going to say, in the 1960s and 1970s, I think it's very, very, very plausible. I mean, I do remember, was it late 70s, early 80s, when you suddenly had all children being taken from families because supposedly they were being involved in satanic rituals? Do you remember that in the news?
Late 70s, yeah.
And if you didn't like your parents, you told social services they were doing satanic rituals on you when you were drugged, and so you could only vaguely remember that kind of stuff. So to me, that is plausible. And like you say, there was the whole sort of... And it's interesting that you saw this after World War I, that there was a revival of spiritualism and everything else because of all the people who'd been lost during World War I. And then you see it again, sort of, say, 15 years after World War II, there's a sudden revival. And it's these new generations coming through that want to make their mark and want to do something a bit wrong and sort of buck against social trends. And I say, when you look at the music that was starting to come to the forefront, things like Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and all of those who... they were your early, I suppose, satanic bands, and there's supposedly with some of the Led Zeppelin album covers, there's because Jimmy Page was a massive Crowleyite. That is well known. He still is. He still collects things to do with Aleister Crowley. He bought the house up in Scotland because it had been Aleister Crowley's. So it doesn't surprise me that people would have been dabbling in it at that point. And I think the fact there were animals found drained of blood, and there's no predator, I think, in the UK that would have done that, like animal predator that could have done it.
So
To me, that's an indication that, yes, people were dabbling in black masses and black magic and whatever you want to call it. The documentation I'm talking about was before that, you know, if somebody had conjured something up in the 1700s.
Okay. Yeah.
That's where I'm saying it surprises me. There's nothing, like not even a rumour about one of the people who lived there that they did stuff like that. So I'm kind of... I think it was almost a case of Chinese whispers, and like you say, the place is the whole Victorian side of things. Those things are so beautifully Gothic; they almost inspire that kind of Hammer House horror thing.
I mean, this is why we first went there, because of the place itself.
Yeah.
We didn't go because of the vampire. We went because of the cemetery itself. We wanted to see the place.
And the link between the Egyptian and the Victorian, they had the same mentality in relation to mortality and the afterlife. I think that's why there was a link there in relation to that two types of architecture. So just how it inspired and the mind set behind it all just amazes me, really.
Yeah. No, I think it's... I mean, I find it a genuinely fascinating tale. Personally, no, I don't think there's a vampire. I also don't think there's a demon there, because I'm not a big believer in demons, especially as how would a demon be walking along or absorbed into consecrated ground? Surely that flies in the face of the whole demon versus angel theory. That doesn't make sense to me. That it could be a negative spirit, but not necessarily a demon. But then again, I don't know about you guys. I always find graveyards and stuff are some of the most peaceful, quiet, inactive places that there is.
Absolutely.
Nature reserve, isn't it? So, as well. So
sorry.
It's a nature reserve as well. So you go there for solitude, don't you?
Exactly.
And recoup.
Exactly. I mean, I go to graveyards and stuff, so I'm not being shouted at. Or I say some of the World War I ones, World War II ones I've gone to have been pretty active, but in general, church graveyards, I don't find I get yelled at by. I don't hear the voices in them. But I just wonder. Say that to me, if say for a demon, how could you conjure a demon on ground that's been meant to be consecrated by Christianity? I mean, maybe someone who's a demonologist or a Christian could explain that to me, how it could happen, but I don't. I thought that it's kind of polar opposites.
Yeah, true.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
It could be an element, but it could be something that's not, of that form, of a different type of form, if you know what I mean. The element type. Again, another law, another folklore, but elementals again, because they can shapeshift as well. So, but there's just too many recorded incidents there not to dismiss it in its entirety, if you know what I mean. So,
I'm not dismissing it. Couldn't it just be a ghost?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah,
I mean, you've also got to remember as well. It's supposedly this creature, this vampire, was brought back before the actual cemetery was there, before it was consecrated ground. So there's that possibility as well. So, but who knows? Who knows?
Interesting. But as we said before, do not go breaking into the cemetery to see if you can find anything. If I hear that anyone has done that, I will come and whoop some ass. Because
they'll have to deal with me and us, to be honest.
All right, well, we'll form a posse and we'll hunt them down, because it annoys me when I hear that people have done stuff like that. That's just disrespectful and basically being an asshole. So do not do it. Go on a proper tour.
It's your heritage. Protect your heritage.
Exactly. Yes, I get very angry when I hear people are desecrating things and damaging things, and they think it's okay to do it, and then they bloody well put it on YouTube and think everyone's going to watch them. And then they get angry when you point out that you're breaking the law and you shouldn't be doing that. Yeah.
It also destroys it for the rest of us who want to go to these places with the respect we have and do the investigations that we do. It destroys it for us as well.
Yeah. Well, I must admit, there is somewhere I want to go and do an investigation, and they keep saying no to me. And I've said to my husband, can we just go in there and take a couple of gadgets with us and sit quietly in the corner and have a pint while we're doing it? Because we know when it's quiet. So there are ways and means. You don't have to be totally disrespectful and damage things, and you can still be sort of, go on the tour and just happen to have your Ovilus in your pocket and see what happens.
You're not allowed to film. You're not allowed to even film in Westgate. You're not allowed to film in there either.
Oh, you're not allowed to take photos or anything.
No.
Well, actually, the Northgate Cemetery, you're only allowed to go around in the tour now.
Yeah, I know there's one that you pay to get in, but you can wander around freely, and then there's another one, it's a guided tour only, isn't it?
East it's about £4 to get in, you can wander, but West's was about 12 quid when we went.
£12.50. Yeah, £12.50, and that was a guided tour only. So that's the one worth seeing, to be honest, out the two.
Well, I think this is a subject you can never stop researching, really, because now bringing up the Ashurst family, you can go deeper and deeper, and then looking at, are there any other suicides in the area? Are there any other sort of accounts and stuff? Personally, I don't think it's a vampire. I think it's just a spirit, but it could be an amalgamation of energies rather than just one spirit. It's an interesting one. Other than hunting vampires and talking paranormal, what else have you guys got that you're doing these days?
We've got our own podcast.
Is it bizarre? Is it very bizarre?
Yeah, bizarre dimensions. Yeah. Basically, we're trying to cover a whole host of esoteric subject matter, from ufology, UFOs, conspiracy theories, and obviously a whole host of ghostly tales and what we get up to on our investigations, and other teams as well. So during the years we've been doing this, we've made close allies, friends with a lot of teams up and down the breadth of the country, and we just want to bring their experiences, their knowledge to the front for everybody to tap into as well. So it's a big mixed bag of nuts, but we enjoy doing it. I think we're on episode 3, is it, John, now?
Yeah, this next one's episode 3, yeah. We're also into actual people, a legacy we want to leave as well. I mean, Russ can tell you more about this one, to be honest.
Yeah, we're doing a legacy in relation to people's personal spiritual spirit experiences. And we want to try and record as many as possible. Now, I've been an avid collector of, you say ghost stories, a bit cheesy, through my life. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking now as I'm getting older, I'm thinking all these people who've got stories to tell. And as you hit on earlier, Penny, it was a bit of a taboo back in the day to speak about experiences in case you get locked up or discredited. Yep. But there's a lot of the older generation especially, that are taking their own experiences to the grave, and I think it seems sacrilege not to have a mechanism for something to record that experience, if you know what I mean, and because it's all valuable and it's a legacy, it's like a legacy project we're working on. So we've got a fair few entries into that legacy already, and we do try and air a few of these on our YouTube channel, some of the more spookier, weirder ones, but that's what we're all constantly working on that. Obviously our podcast, and when we get back out of this torrid COVID virus, then when it's all safe and sound and we followed the guidelines, hopefully we can all get back out and meet up and do more investigations and research. So that's where we're at.
Cool. Well, we've got Smethwick Baths to all do together, haven't we? When we want to introduce Wayne to Philip.
Yeah,
introduce my husband to Philip. Yeah. Thing is, Philip apparently likes sort of quite masculine, sort of pretty boy types, and as my husband's a roofer, ex-rugby player, weightlifter, hopefully he would quite like him, and he's up for it. I told him not to bend over and pick up the soap, whatever he does. He's a good little guinea pig, that one. So if anyone wants to contact you with a story, how do they do it?
Well, find us on Facebook, Wednesbury Paranormal, or Bizarre Dimensions. We've got 2 pages. We've got YouTube channel, Wednesbury Paranormal. We're on Twitter, or just find us, our email address and website, etc. All the details on there. Just find us on Facebook. It's probably easiest.
And your podcast, is that a Facebook Live type thing, or is it an audio one like this one?
We'd film it live every couple of weeks, every Tuesday evening, every bi-weekly, and then I upload it onto our YouTube channel for those who've missed it. So, yeah, we did one last week, a bit of a controversial theory in relation to the paranormal, called quantum paranormal theory, where we had our guest was very much into his science, heavily science-based, and so the
it was a Marmite guest.
Yep, science versus religion came out, and but it was a good show in the end. To be honest, it didn't get heated, which I thought it would, but it was still some controversial points raised though.
Yeah, it was interesting though. Really interesting.
Haven't you got a little blonde gobby Essex girl on soon?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Yeah, when's that? That's June the.
When's that? Cheers.
To be ill that day, John.
Oh dear. 2nd of June, I think we've got it in for.
Yeah.
Well, the 2nd of June.
Is going to be on our show, so please make sure you tune in. But sure you'll come up with some interesting topics for us.
Oh, it depends what you want to talk to me about. You haven't told me yet, so.
I'll give it a brilliant. It's the 9th of June.
Oh, it's the 9th, is it? I thought it was the 2nd.
Hold on. We've got 19th, and then one. No, sorry, very sorry. The 2nd, you're right, Penny. 2nd of June. 2nd of June. You're live.
Yeah, I'll have to find out I'll have to remind myself how to put makeup on again, because I've not been wearing much makeup. I only put makeup on when I've had to do Facebook Lives recently. So obviously, if anyone wants to get in touch with you guys, you've got the Wednesbury Paranormal page, you've got the Bizarre Dimensions page as well. You're also linked to groups like HD Paranormal with the wonderful Jane and Simon Harris. Keith. You've got Keith, obviously, with lovely Karen and Eddie and all those people. So you Midlanders are all sort of a bit linked, aren't you?
Sure are. Yeah, very incessant.
Isn't it just keeping it in the family and all that? So who's your next guest? Oh, we love Andy. We do love Andy. So who's your next guest then? You recorded the one with Patrick Jackson, wasn't it?
Yep.
It was the I can't even remember the title of it because it's way over my head. I'm history, I'm not science. Who's your next guest?
Our next guest, we have a lovely team called C&D.
I know C&D. Have you recorded it yet?
No, that's going to. They're doing it a week on Tuesday with us. So.
Well, they get mentioned in my book, Haunted Experiment, when we did the Harwich side, because they helped me out doing the Harwich one.
Oh, brilliant! So
yes, I know C&D very well.
The two girls are coming on, and we've often investigated with them, and we've got lots of evidence. Well, to review between us on the show. So they was up for an award on the Higgy Pop.
Yes, they were. Yeah.
For one of their bits of evidence, so we're going to be studying and analysing that on the show. So.
No, they're amusing. I think it was an investigation I did with them at Harwich that somebody was supposed to be there to intro it and he hadn't turned up. And I think it was C was all sort of nervous because she doesn't really like public speaking. And she said to me, she goes, "Do you mind doing an intro?" And left me for like 10 minutes to talk. And I was like, okay. And she went, "But you did fine." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm used to talking rubbish." But, it was the fact she just sort of went, "You're all right to do it, aren't you? Here's Penny." And I'm like, okay, thanks. They're hilarious, those two. Because Dee got married quite recently as well, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. Yeah. We last saw them at is it the Rebout Fort in Hastings?
Harwich. Hastings or Harwich?
Is it?
Harwich is the one that's the Harwich Redoubt, and then you've got the Redoubt Fort is down in Kent.
Yeah, it was at the circular 360 where the energy resides in a 360. There's big circle of buildings. I'm not sure
Essex.
Which one.
In Essex, that's Harwich. Yeah, Harwich Redoubt. Yeah.
With chaos and spirits all the way through that building. Couldn't catch them.
It's an interesting one. I actually prefer the fort that's across the water in Felixstowe, Langard. That's my baby, if you like. But anyway, cool. Well, we've been waffling on now for an hour and a half. I think people are probably sick to death of my voice, if not yours. But thank you ever so much for chatting to me about Highgate Cemetery. I've given you some more bits to look into in your research, and I'm going to find out what that condition is called when people don't deteriorate, because it's really bugging me now. But you've got to find out for me if the tunnel's still used.
Yep, definitely.
Cool. Well, on that note, let's thank my lovely guests, Russ and John from Wednesbury Paranormal up there in the Midlands, in the Black Country.
Country.
There you go. Didn't call you Brummies.
Thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome, guys. Well, that's it. That's it for this session of Haunted Histories. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have got any questions, obviously do shoot them across to me, and then I can either pass them on to the boys, or I will endeavour to answer them for you myself. As ever, if you've got any history subjects you want me to write a blog about, or even see if I can do a show about at some point, I've got quite a full schedule of shows for this year, but I can always find time to do something. Do let me know. Keep an eye out for my next history lecture that I'll be putting up on the page very, very soon. But on that note, you've been listening to myself, Penny Griffiths Morgan, and this has been Haunted Histories on Paranormal UK Radio. And as always, have a good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.